I want the forces of progress to get their shit together and figure out how to not just warn about the far-right extremists, not just complain about them, not just be outraged by them, not just be reacting to them all the time and pointing at them, but actually to outcompete them, to build a movement that is bigger, better, feistier, more fiery, more magnanimous, more merciful, and more effective.
The whites were in charge, let's call it 1776 to today. But brown and black people are now going to be in the majority as it relates to the demography. So if the whites are in charge, no problem. Let's have the rules of democracy. Oh, wait a minute. Black and brown people could be in charge. So let's change the rules. What do I got wrong about that?
There's no question that if you had to pick like one fundamental force in American public life today, and it's, of course, there's a lot of things going on, but if you had to pick one, I think you'd say this was a country founded, with, on paper, some very sweeping ideals for all mankind. But in practice, as you know, they only really applied to propertied white men at the beginning. And then the property requirement was relaxed. And then the male requirement was relaxed. And only in the 20th century was the kind of requirement around whiteness relaxed. And it is absolutely the case that as this country has opened up its meaning and institutions and rights to more and more people, a shrinking minority of white Americans, and to be clear, it's not all white Americans by any means, a shrinking minority of white Americans has concluded that they would rather break the republic than share it. That's the choice, right? We can share it or we can break it. And I think we're not unique in this experience around the world, as you were talking about. It is easier to share resources and believe in a democracy when everybody looks the same, right? I mean, we talk about Sweden and Norway and they're having all these great safety nets. Well, if you've ever been to those countries, it's easy to look around and say, these are people I'm willing to share with. These are people I'm willing to be in a safety net with. We are trying to do something in this country that is quite different. With all due respect to Sweden and Norway, with all due respect to France and Germany, with all due respect to India and China, none of those countries are actually on the path we are to creating a truly plural country made of the world, forged of the world, people from every kind of background. And I sometimes think those of us who want to live in that world, who want to live in a future of continued expanded liberal democracy, multiracial democracy, we don't do enough of a good job of reminding ourselves that we're trying to do a really hard thing, a thing that maybe has not quite been proven out in the world. And so this revolt against the future, which is what I regard the kind of Trumpist, increasingly fascist movement as being, this revolt against the future, in some ways is a natural movement of resistance to progress that is happening. And I wrote the book because I want the forces of progress to get their shit together and figure out how to not just warn about the far-right extremists, not just complain about them, not just be outraged by them, not just be reacting to them all the time and pointing at them, but actually to outcompete them, to build a movement that is bigger, better, feistier, more fiery, more magnanimous, more merciful, and more effective.
Well, I got something out of the book, all of that, but I also got a little bit of a restatement of the founding fathers out of this book in a weird way. Let me test this on you, because this is what I heard in your book, that they got it right, but they were too exclusionary. And so we've had all this amendments and all this social progress to make it more inclusionary. And now it's probably time to restate the ideals of what a republic is and self-government is, and recognize that if we become less tribal, less black and white, brown versus black, black versus white, white versus brown, etc., and we become more inclusive, the diversity of those ideas and the ability to learn from each other's life experiences would just lead to a better quality of life for all of us. Is that what I'm getting from your book, or no?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, not to make this about some places versus other places, but like you and I live in New York City, right? So you and I already live in this world, right? If you're living in much of California, you already living in this world. Actually, in a lot of places in this country, you're living in this world, right? When you and I step outside in New York City, you are hearing languages from all over. You are encountering people. You work with people. I work with people who represent the most intelligent, passionate, committed, creative people from around the world, kind of cherry-picked by the United States to come here and invest their talents and dreams here, build their families here. You and I live in that world, and I don't think we would have it any other way, right? I don't think you, whether you're white like you or brown like me, I don't think I would go, or you would go, trade it to live in a place of a monoculture, right? I could go live in India where everybody, comes from a background I do. You could go, there's a reason we're not living in those places, right? There's a reason our ancestors chose to come here.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I'm laughing a little bit because I'm white now. I can tell you that my grandmother did not feel white.
Correct. It took your people some time to become white in the American.
But what I'm laughing about is my Italian American buddies that I live with, they're all pro-Trump. And I'm like looking at them, okay, your grandmother was told that she couldn't get a job anywhere. There were signs that said no Italians need apply. And they told my grandmother to go back to the countries they originally came from. And that was the fight I got into with Donald Trump, because he was saying that to the 4 congresswomen, ironically 3 of which were born here in the United States. So it's this nativism, this racism.
Let's talk about your Italian American friends for a second, because on the one level, I would say, and I recognize that kind of type you're talking about exactly, right? And there's so many versions of it in this country right now. On the one hand, I would hold them responsible for their own views and hold them responsible for a kind of narrowness, right?
It's so misguided and it's so lacks context and an understanding of our history. It's so misguided.
But let me make a second point. I also would hold what I call the pro-democracy movement, because this is not just about Democrats and Republicans, right? This is like, do you believe in democracy at this point, or do you not?
100%.
I would also hold the pro-democracy, pro-inclusion movement that wants that future. I would hold them accountable for failing to organize and win over people like that also, right? Because I imagine, maybe I'm wrong, I imagine your friends you're talking about, these are not clan robes people, right? These are probably decent people who would treat people of color very nicely in their personal life, right? All of that, right? I know exactly who you're talking about. And so what I think has happened there, it's at the heart of the story of the Persuaders, is we have failed to tell those people a better story about how to think of America, right? The right, for all of its narrowness and kind of dystopianness right now, I think is better at message. It's better at narrative. It's better at telling a story about America that is easy to access, that plays into the fears and anxieties people have. And I think what we need to do is to build a pro-democracy movement that is better at persuasion, so that guys exactly like who you're talking about are not only interpersonally kind to people of color who are their neighbors or they work with, but are able to go from that personal interaction and that personal decency they have to supporting a vision of a country that operates like that at scale for everyone.
I mean, I think it's very well said. You're also talking about the condescension of some people. Frankly, on the left, there's a lot of condescension towards the people on the right. And that's why the right tries to own the libs and all this sort of nonsense that goes on.